As I was packing the final stack of officially stamped fellowship acceptance documents into my folder, Carter Hayes' relationship announcement crashed into my line of sight without warning. It was on the Instagram feed of a mutual friend, a heavily filtered engagement photo taken at one of the most expensive rooftop restaurants overlooking the Chicago skyline. Carter was wearing a perfectly tailored custom suit, his face sporting that thoroughly smug smile I knew so well. Leaning against him was Lauren Sterling, the daughter of the city's Commissioner of Urban Development. She was smiling brightly, and the massive diamond on her ring finger caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, making my eyes sting slightly. The caption, written by Carter himself, read, "8 years of searching, and I've finally found the one. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you, my beautiful bride, Lauren." 8 years. My fingertip hovered over those 2 words for a moment. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. There was no sharp pain, only a slow, heavy sense of suffocation. Our 8 years had just been his searching process, and Lauren was the completion of his search. I calmly exited the app. I didn't leave a like or a comment. The screen of my phone reflected my face in that moment, pale, calm, without a single ripple of emotion. 2 years of preparation had all been for the composure of this exact moment. My phone vibrated gently. It was a direct message from Carter. "Chloe, I'm sorry. You saw it, right? The romance has been gone for a long time. We were just together out of habit and comfort. Let's not contact each other anymore. Let's end this with some dignity." The condescending charity bleeding through his words made it seem as though the 8 years of my youth were just a speck of dust on his ladder to success that needed to be brushed off with dignity. I could even imagine the expression on his face as he typed those words, his brows slightly furrowed, carrying the light relief of having finally swatted away a nuisance. I took a deep breath, tapped the screen lightly, and replied with a single word. "Okay." After hitting send, I switched my phone to airplane mode, ignoring it completely. I turned to open my laptop, expertly typing in a complex string of passwords to log into the Chicago Municipal Environmental Agency's internal server. I had built the back end of this system for him 3 years ago. All the firewalls and encryption protocols were my handiwork. I navigated to the project database and found the core patent application for the Urban Water Purification Initiative, the very project that was about to secure his promotion to deputy commissioner. Under the first author column, my name was still listed, though it was an unspoken secret between us that he would make me change it to his before the final submission. I moved my mouse over the Revoke Authorization button and clicked Confirm without hesitation. The pop-up dialog box offered a cold prompt. Authorization revoked. This patent will revert to its initial, unassigned status. After doing this, I unplugged the silver external hard drive on my desk. It contained the core data simulations, model constructions, and risk assessment reports I had done for every single one of his projects over the last 5 years. This was the true source of the professional competence he was so proud of. It was the path to the top that I had paved for him through countless sleepless nights over the past 8 years. I plugged the hard drive into my computer and selected Format. The progress bar moved slowly and firmly toward 100%, just like my gradually dying heart. The next morning, I stood in the terminal at O'Hare International Airport, dragging a simple suitcase. The sunlight pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows was a bit blinding. I put on my sunglasses and was about to walk toward the TSA security checkpoint when I turned off airplane mode. My phone was instantly flooded with countless missed calls and text messages. The screen flashed wildly with the same name, Carter Hayes. I swiped to answer but didn't speak. From the other end came his frantic, furious, and slightly terrified roar. "Chloe Davis, are you crazy? What happened to the patent? Where's the data on the hard drive? Where did you move all my data?" His voice trembled slightly with anger, completely stripped of the calm dignity he had when he texted me yesterday. I listened quietly, a very faint, ice-cold smile curving the corners of my mouth. Supervisor Hayes. It was the first time I had ever addressed him with such detached formality. "Those are my patents and my data. Now, I've simply taken back what belongs to me. You can't do this. Don't you know how important that project is to me? Chloe, you're ruining me." His voice finally carried a hint of begging. "The person ruining you isn't me," I said flatly. "It's yourself." With that, I hung up the phone. Before Carter could call back, I walked over to a trash can and neatly popped the SIM card out of my phone. That tiny piece of plastic held all the call logs and text messages from my 8 years with him. I looked at it the way one looks at a Scantron test filled with wrong answers. I opened my fingers. The SIM card traced a tiny arc in the air and fell silently into the darkness. Passengers traveling to Boston. Please note that your flight is now boarding. The sweet voice of the gate agent echoed over the intercom. I adjusted the handle of my suitcase, turned around, and walked toward the boarding bridge, leading to a brand new world without looking back. Behind me was Carter's panic, Lauren's wealthy dreams, and my youth that had remained silent for 8 whole years. Ahead of me was a vast sky belonging entirely to me. The massive roar of the plane's engines left the city and the past far behind on the ground. A slight turbulence at cruising altitude acted like a shaking hand, pulling me back into the deep sea of memories. Back then, I was a junior, and Carter was a senior. We met in the university's main research lab. He was the upperclassman from a poor background, who always wore faded button-down shirts, but had stars in his eyes. I was the underclassman who had been fast-tracked into the project because I had published 2 papers in national academic journals. Our romance began with a cheap cup of instant coffee. To meet a project deadline, we stayed in the lab for 3 days and 3 nights. In the early hours of the 3rd day, I nearly passed out from exhaustion over a mountain of data. He was the one who handed me a piping hot cup of coffee, using his deep, gentle voice to say, "Chloe, drink something. Don't ruin your health." The coffee was bitter, but in that moment, my heart rippled with an overwhelming sweetness. After we got together, the main theme of our lives was the struggle to survive. He wanted to go to grad school at our university, but his family's financial situation wouldn't allow him to focus entirely on his studies. His mother was chronically ill and bedridden, and her monthly medical bills felt like a mountain. So, I took over all the living expenses for the both of us. I worked as a tutor, took freelance translation jobs, and used my monthly scholarships and part-time income to rent a tiny attic apartment near the school that had a broken radiator. Chicago winters made the room feel like an icebox. We wrapped ourselves in a single blanket, keeping each other warm on a small twin bed. He would always take my freezing hands and feet and press them against his chest, resting his chin on the top of my head, painting a picture of our future over and over again. "Chloe, you're my lucky star." His warm breath clouded my hair. "When I get my master's degree and find a good job, I promise I'll put you in a big house with heated floors, so you'll never be afraid of the cold in the winter again." Back then, I believed that as long as there was love, we could endure any hardship. During my senior year, I was offered a fully funded fellowship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was the holy grail for everyone in our major. I excitedly told him the news, but he fell silent. That night, he held me, his voice carrying a fragility I had never heard before. "Chloe, what will I do if you leave? My mom's illness has gotten worse. I'm afraid I can't hold on by myself." Looking at his bloodshot eyes and helplessness, my heart softened. With almost no hesitation, I tore up the acceptance letter that held all my academic dreams. I told him it was okay, that I could always go to MIT later, but right now I just wanted to stay with him. He held me, whispering, "I'm sorry and I love you," over and over in my ear. He said he would never let me down for the rest of his life. I stayed behind. I stayed with him through grad school, through graduation, and until he entered the best municipal environmental science institute in the city. To take better care of him, I gave up the opportunity to work at a top-tier research lab on the coast and chose to work at the same agency, doing the most basic entry-level research. When he first joined the agency, he struggled immensely. The political connections in a mid-sized city's municipal government were complex. As a young man from a small town with no background, he had theoretical knowledge but hit a wall at every turn. Every promotion report he wrote was rejected by upper management for being out of touch and lacking practical data support. So, I became the ghostwriter behind his success. I used my professional expertise to revise his reports, build his data models, and even sneaked out on weekends to collect first-hand field data for his projects. Behind every excellent numerical report and every innovative proposal, praised by management, was the silhouette of me staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning. When he received his first major project bonus, he took me to an expensive steakhouse. Holding a glass of red wine, his eyes sparkled as he looked at me. "Chloe, I knew it. You are my rock. I wouldn't be where I am today without you." He used that bonus to buy me a small platinum ring. He said, "When I establish myself and make senior director, we'll get married. When that time comes, I'll definitely buy you a huge diamond ring and make you the happiest Mrs. Hayes." I stroked that simple ring, smiling and nodding, thinking that the finish line of happiness was right around the corner. I was drowning in the intoxicating potion he had brewed for me, believing that all my sacrifices were laying the bricks for our shared beautiful future. I never imagined that he was just borrowing my hands to build a ladder to the top for himself, and the day that ladder was finished would be the day I was kicked off it. When did his true nature start showing? Perhaps it was when he got his mid-level promotion and became a project manager. He started getting busier, there were more networking events, and he came home later and later. At first, he would explain with an apologetic tone, saying it was all for our future, but gradually, his explanations turned into impatient brush-offs, even carrying a barely detectable hint of disgust. He started criticizing my clothes. Once, he needed to bring me to an agency dinner. When he saw me wearing the jeans and white button-down shirt I usually wore in the lab, his brows immediately furrowed. "Chloe, can't you dress a bit more feminine? Look at the commissioner's daughter, Lauren Sterling. Every time she comes out, she's dressed beautifully." That was the first time I heard Lauren's name out of his mouth. My heart skipped a beat. I looked down at myself. Spending all year in the lab, I really had neglected fashion. I thought he was just making an offhand comment, so I smiled and said, "Isn't this how all lab rats dress? Practicality comes first." He sighed. That sigh was full of disappointment. "You don't get it, Chloe. In today's society, ability is one thing, but image and connections are more important. If you're always like this, how can I bring you into my circle?" His circle. Once upon a time, our circle was that tiny space in the lab, the warm desk lamp in our rented apartment. But now, he had a new circle. A circle I seemingly didn't fit into. I still went to that dinner. Throughout the meal, he charmed the room, exchanging toasts and navigating the politicians and project representatives with ease. Meanwhile, I couldn't insert myself into their conversations about office politics and exchanging favors. I could only silently keep my head down and eat. Occasionally, Carter would put a piece of food on my plate, but in the brief moments our eyes met, he revealed a flash of embarrassment and discomfort. In that moment, I felt like an outdated jacket he had worn to the wrong occasion. From then on, the we in his mouth gradually turned into I. My project, my promotion, my future. I became a functional background prop in his grand blueprint. When he needed my professional skills, he would call out, "Chloe," with a smile, and toss a pile of chaotic data at me. When he came back from networking, reeking of alcohol and unfamiliar perfume, he would just frown at my concern and say, "Leave it alone. You don't understand." The real awakening happened on our 6th anniversary. I had specifically taken the day off and cooked a whole table of his favorite foods, waiting for him to come home with a heart full of joy. But I waited from dusk until deep into the night. I reheated the food over and over again before he finally dragged his exhausted feet through the door. "Why aren't you asleep yet?" He took off his coat. His tone held no surprise, only exhaustion. "Today's our 6-year anniversary. Did you forget?" I pushed down the disappointment in my heart and asked softly. He froze. A flash of guilt crossed his face, immediately replaced by irritation. "Oh, look at my memory. I've been too busy lately. A new project is launching, and I'm in meetings with the commissioner every day." I pointed to the table of food, forcing a smile. "It's okay. Come eat. I'll heat it up for you." At the dinner table, I summoned all my courage and asked the question that had been hovering in my heart for a long time. "Carter, let's get married. You're a supervisor now. We've been together for 6 years. His fork paused. He didn't look at me. Instead, he stared at the wine glass in front of him, silent for a long time. The tiny flame of hope in my heart was slowly extinguished by the dead, cold air. When he finally spoke, his voice was very light. "Right now is the critical period for my career growth. The department is about to promote a deputy commissioner, and several people are eyeing the spot. If we get married now, plan a wedding, and go on a honeymoon, it'll be too distracting. Just wait for me. Wait 2 more years. Once I secure this position, I promise to give you the grandest wedding. Okay? Wait 2 more years." This phrase, which I had heard countless times, felt like a knife made of shattered ice plunging fiercely into my heart that night. I looked at his familiar face and suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity. Every word he said made logical sense, but I just knew they were all excuses. If a man truly wants to marry you, a mountain of difficulties isn't a problem. If he doesn't want to, even a speck of dust can become a hurdle he can't cross. That night, I stayed awake until dawn. Like a movie playing in my head, I reviewed our 6 years together, the MIT fellowship I gave up for him, every report I stayed up late to edit for him, the medical bills and living expenses I covered for him. All these sacrifices I had made willingly now looked like a sunk cost, tying me down completely. I was afraid of losing him, afraid that 6 years of effort would go down the drain, so I compromised again and again, stepped back again and again. But I suddenly understood that sunk costs only drag a person deeper until they drown completely. The next day, while he was at work, I opened his personal laptop. I didn't go looking to see if he was messaging other women. That was no longer important. I simply looked at his browser search history and saw these lines. Lauren Sterling. What brand of bags does Lauren Sterling like? Best gifts for commissioner's daughter. Top-rated French restaurants in Chicago. In that moment, all my luck and fantasies were ground into dust. I didn't cry, and I didn't throw a tantrum. I just silently closed the laptop, walked over to the mirror, and looked at the girl staring back at me, the one with heavy dark circles under her eyes from staying up late to process his data and keep us afloat. How long had it been since I lived for myself? From that day on, I began my secret plan. I didn't argue with him. On the surface, I was still the gentle and considerate girlfriend. I processed his data when he needed it and left a light on for him when he came home late. But behind his back, I picked up everything I had thrown away all those years ago. I began studying the latest advanced computing architectures. I woke up at 5 in the morning every day to master complex algorithms. I reconnected with Dr. Henderson at MIT and explained my latest research concepts from the past 2 years to him. I poured all my savings into application materials and certifications. For 2 whole years, like a sleeper agent, I quietly paved the road for my escape. I watched Carter get closer and closer to that deputy commissioner position with my help. I watched the arrogance and ambition in his eyes grow stronger. I watched him drift further and further away from me. I had been waiting for a moment where he would personally sever the very last tie between us. And his Instagram announcement yesterday was the starting gun I had been waiting 2 years for. Boston's winter was colder than I imagined. The snow fell like restless spirits, flake by flake, covering the historic city. During my first 3 months in Massachusetts, my life was compressed into a straight line between the lab and my apartment. The new academic environment, the intense pressure of the research schedule, and the massive internal trauma from the forced amputation of an 8-year relationship turned me into a cold machine operating on a set program. I functioned precisely, but felt no warmth. I buried all my emotions deep down, using manic work to numb myself. My mentor, Dr. Henderson, was a rigorous, almost harshly demanding American scientist. He placed high hopes on me, assigning me the most core and difficult part of the entire project group, building an entirely new nanoscale water purification dynamic model. I locked myself in the data, sleeping only 4 hours a day. I thought that as long as I worked hard enough, I could leave the past entirely behind me. Until that late night. The model I had been building for 3 months crashed during its final simulation run due to a microscopic parameter error, causing the entire database to collapse. I stared at the computer screen filled with red error codes. In that instant, the panic, grievance, and exhaustion I had been suppressing for so long flooded me like a broken dam. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My vision blurred. It felt like a ball of cotton was lodged in my throat, preventing me from making a sound. Just as I thought I was going to be swallowed by this endless darkness, the lab door creaked open. A tall figure walked in, bringing the chill of the outdoors with him. He was wearing a bright yellow windbreaker, looking like a burst of energy under the cold lab lights. "Hey, Dr. Davis. It's almost 3 in the morning. Planning to camp out in the lab?" The newcomer was Julian Pierce, a 26-year-old venture capitalist. He was the main investor for our project, representing a top-tier environmental tech VC firm out of Silicon Valley. He had deep, expressive eyes, a sharp jawline, and slightly curly brown hair. When he smiled, you could see a slight crookedness to his teeth, making him look like an energetic golden retriever. He had no obligation to be in the lab every day, but he had an almost fanatical interest in our research topic, coming in nearly every day to discuss things with us until late at night. I quickly wiped away the uncontrollable moisture seeping from the corners of my eyes, turning around with a voice hoarse from tension. "Mr. Pierce, I was just checking the final data." Julian walked over to me, his gaze falling on my computer screen displaying the crashed code. He didn't press for details, nor did he adopt a condescending posture to lecture me on what I should have done. He just watched quietly for a moment, then turned and walked out. I thought he was going to report my failure to Dr. Henderson. My heart sank to the bottom, but a few minutes later, he came back. He had 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands and a paper bag. He placed a coffee in front of me, pulled out a warm bagel from the bag, and shoved it into my hands without taking no for an answer. Eat something first. He pulled up a chair and sat next to me, his voice warm but firm. Dr. Davis, when machines overheat, they need to be rebooted. Even geniuses need rest. I froze. Holding the warm bagel, I looked into his eyes, which seemed exceptionally genuine under the lights. The hard wall of ice in my heart seemed to crack, just a tiny bit. I ruined the model, I said softly, my voice carrying a tremble I hadn't even noticed. 3 months of hard work, all gone. Then take another 3 months to build it back up. Julian's tone was relaxed, as if he were talking about the simplest thing in the world. Isn't this what research is? Finding the single path to success among countless failures. You're amazing. You can definitely do it. Why do you think I'm amazing? I raised my head, my eyes red as I asked him. Over the past 3 months, all I had heard were doubts and challenges. He was the first person to tell me I was amazing with such absolute certainty. Because of the fact that when you first arrived, it only took you a week to master our internal database language. Because of the hypothesis you brought up at the symposium last time regarding ion adsorption boundaries, which even Dr. Henderson couldn't stop praising. Julian tore off a small piece of his bagel and ate it slowly. And also because of my intuition as an investor. I invest in projects, but I invest in people even more. Chloe Davis, you are the most talented and resilient researcher I've ever met. His words were like a current of warm water rushing instantly through my entire body. On that freezing night in Boston, this guy who felt like a little son used a cup of coffee, a bagel, and a few simple but powerful words to pull me back from the edge of a breakdown. That night, he didn't leave. He sat right next to me, accompanying me as we checked the crashed data starting from the very bottom layer. He didn't pry into my past, nor did he feed me empty, toxic positivity. He just stayed quietly by my side, handing me documents when I needed them, or offering highly constructive ideas. By daybreak, we finally found the fatal parameter error. Though the road to rebuilding the model was still long, the panic in my heart had vanished. I looked at the first rays of morning light over Boston outside the window, then turned to Julian, who had already fallen asleep resting on the desk, and whispered, "Thank you." He probably didn't hear it, but from that moment on, I knew my frozen life finally had the possibility of thawing. Overcoming technical hurdles was a far longer and more painful process than I had imagined. For the next 6 months, I essentially lived the life of a hermit, dedicating myself entirely to the research. The model was rebuilt 3 times and torn down 3 times. Every time I was just one step away from success, a new, unexpected problem would pop up, instantly resetting all my hard work to zero. The sense of defeat grew like wild vines in my heart, especially on those lonely, late nights. The words Carter used to say to me would haunt me like a nightmare. "Chloe, besides writing a few reports and crunching some data, what else can you do? With your personality, you're going to get eaten alive out in the real world." Over 8 years, he had quietly destroyed my confidence, making me habitually view myself as a secondary support character who needed to rely on him. Now, as I stood alone on a top-tier international academic stage facing real challenges, that deeply embedded self-doubt began to viciously bite back. Julian astutely noticed my mental block. One afternoon, when I irritably crumpled up my scratch paper after another data mismatch, he forcibly shut my laptop. "Let's go. I'm taking you somewhere." He grabbed my wrist with a force that left no room for argument. He dragged me out of the lab, put me into his flashy convertible sports car, and drove us straight out of Boston. Eventually, we pulled up to a small airstrip in upstate New York. "What are you doing?" I looked at the colorful skydiving parachutes in the distance, a sense of dread rising in my chest. "Taking you flying." Julian winked at me, his smile as bright as the sun. Half an hour later, wearing a heavy jumpsuit, I stood terrified at the door of the plane, 10,000 feet in the air. Below me were rolling mountains and a sea of clouds. The wind howled in my ears. My instructor was checking the gear behind me, and Julian was right across from me, already prepared to jump. "Scared?" he yelled over the radio to cut through the wind. "I'm terrified to death." I felt my legs turning to jelly. "Chloe, look at me!" Julian's voice cut through the wind with absolute clarity. "Right now, you're like standing at the door of this plane. Scared of falling, scared of failing, scared that you can't do it alone. But you forgot something. You already know how to fly." With that, he gave me a thumbs up and leaped backward, instantly disappearing from my line of sight. In that moment, it felt like something struck me. He was right. I already knew how to fly. Before I met Carter Hayes, I was a girl who soared freely in the academic skies, confident, decisive, and fearless. It was Carter who used 8 years to slowly break my wings, making me forget my instinct to fly. Ready? The instructor's voice sounded behind me. I took a deep breath, looked at the magnificent landscape below, closed my eyes, and took a step forward. In the moment of weightlessness, massive terror and exhilaration enveloped me simultaneously. I tumbled through the air, my screams, the sound of the wind, and my heartbeat tangling together. When I finally stabilized and spread my arms, I felt like a bird breaking free from all restraints. Julian glided over to my side, flying parallel with me above the clouds. He pointed to the mountains below and yelled loudly over the radio. "Chloe, remember this feeling. Don't use other people's arrogance to punish your own talent. People who build empires always have the courage to start over. Always have the courage to start over." I yelled along with him, screaming out all the grievances and resentment buried in my heart. My tears mixed with the wind and instantly vanished into the sky. After returning from the drop zone, it was as if my internal pathways had been completely unblocked. I no longer fixated on past failures or feared unknown challenges. I began to examine my model from a brand new, much grander perspective. Julian practically became my full-time sounding board. He used his vast network as an investor to source the latest industry data for me. He ran simulations with me over and over again, and whenever I hit a dead end, he used his wildly creative business mindset to offer me entirely new angles to solve the problem. Our relationship quietly shifted during these times, fighting side by side. We would share a single pizza in the lab late at night. We would go for morning jogs along the Charles River on weekends. He took me to loud rock concerts, and on my birthday, he clumsily played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for me on the piano. He was like a blazing star, using his unreserved passion and sunlight to slowly thaw my long-frozen heart. He never asked about my past, but he used his actions to heal all my wounds. Finally, on an evening when light snow was falling, after a full year of repeated testing and revisions, my nanoscale water purification dynamic model ran perfectly in its final simulation. When the green text reading "success" appeared on the screen, I jumped up excitedly and threw my arms around Julian. "I did it! Julian, I did it!" He hugged me back tightly, resting his chin on the top of my head, his voice filled with a smile. "I knew you could do it." I looked up from his embrace and met his eyes, which were brimming with starlight. In that moment, all words felt entirely unnecessary. I stood on my tiptoes and gently pressed my lips against his. Outside the window, the snow was swirling. Inside, it was as warm as spring. I knew that after 8 years of silence, my world had finally welcomed the blazing star that belonged to it. Time is the best catalyst and the sharpest carving knife. The following 3 years were the period of fastest growth in my life. With Julian's unreserved support and Dr. Henderson's dedicated mentorship, my nanoscale water purification model not only achieved major theoretical breakthroughs but, pushed by Julian's firm, successfully commercialized. It was applied to cleanup projects for several heavily polluted rivers across the Rust Belt, with shocking effectiveness, stunning the international environmental tech industry. Honors and awards poured in. I went from being an unknown researcher to a highly anticipated rising star in environmental technology. My relationship with Julian deepened over these 3 years of fighting side by side. He was my most in-sync partner in my career, and the warmest harbor in my life. We celebrated every success together and shouldered every pressure together. He understood all my stubbornness and ached for all my exhaustion. 3 years later, I was standing on the stage at the Global Climate Summit in Washington, D.C., for their awards gala. Wearing a simple but elegant white gown, I accepted the Global Young Innovator Award, the highest honor in our industry from a Nobel laureate. Under the spotlight, I used flawless, articulate English to explain my scientific philosophy to the world. I looked down into the audience at Julian sitting in the front row, his eyes smiling, his gaze as gentle as a spring lake. I knew half the credit for this trophy belonged to him. After the ceremony ended, Julian walked into the backstage green room and closed the door behind him. "Congratulations, my queen." He walked up to me, a moving light flashing in his eyes. "Congratulations to you too, my chief investor. You really made a killing this time," I joked with a smile. He shook his head, his expression becoming more serious than I had ever seen. He pulled a velvet box from his suit pocket and got down on one knee in front of me. My breathing instantly stopped. He opened the box. Inside lay a ring, but the design was highly unique. It had no diamonds. The main stone was a flawless, translucent crystal glowing with a deep blue light. "Chloe," Julian looked up at me, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "This is the first piece of lab-grown core crystal we developed together. It can purify the most contaminated water sources in the world. I thought it would be the perfect witness to our absolute, pure love. Will you marry me? Let me be your partner and protector for the rest of my life." My tears instantly spilled over. I nodded frantically and reached out my hand. He gently slipped that one-of-a-kind ring onto my ring finger. The cool crystal touched my skin, but it felt like a current of electricity instantly warming my entire heart. He stood up, pulled me tightly into his arms, and kissed me deeply. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Chicago, Carter Hayes' life was in shambles. Ever since I left, he had lost his core technical cheat code. The city's new ecological water treatment project he had staked his hopes on was repeatedly halted by the city council due to massive loopholes and severely falsified data. He was overwhelmed, either getting chewed out by management at work or being mocked and ridiculed by his wife, Lauren, at home. Lauren's spoiled brat temper fully exposed itself amidst the mundane realities of marriage. She looked down on Carter's lack of background and couldn't stand his career stagnation. Although her father had pulled strings to clear up some trouble for him, that condescending charity felt like needles deeply piercing whatever pitiful pride Carter had left. He started drinking heavily. Late at night, he would scroll through my old Instagram posts over and over again. He looked at the traces of our shared struggles, at the hopes for the future I had once written down. Regret and bitterness gnawed at his heart like venomous snakes. More than once, he wondered if things would be different if he hadn't sent that heartless text, if the person he married had been me. He even started frantically asking our mutual friends for updates about me, but people either said they didn't know or just ignored his messages entirely. It was as if I had been thoroughly erased from the earth. He couldn't find a single trace of me. He could only continue playing the role of the humble son-in-law to the commissioner in endless regret and frustration, fantasizing about one day proving himself through his own hard work. What he didn't know was that a storm that would utterly crush all his fantasies was currently howling toward him. And the person starting this storm was the exact worthless nerd he had personally shoved away 3 years ago. To save the failing Key project and secure critical ecological funding in the upcoming federal budget, the city of Chicago finally made the hard decision to spend a fortune bringing in a top-tier environmental tech consulting group from MIT for technical guidance and project restructuring. As the current head of the project, Carter naturally became the primary liaison for this reception. This was his last chance to turn things around. He poured all his energy into it, hoping to perform well in front of these elite scientists and save his job. On the day the consulting group arrived, he specifically wore his most expensive suit, his hair combed flawlessly. He brought a group of subordinates an hour early to respectfully wait at the exit of the private jet terminal at O'Hare. He held a printed welcome sign in his hands, his face wearing a humble, enthusiastic smile he had practiced countless times. At 3:00 p.m., the automatic doors of the terminal slid open. A group of professionals with strict, powerful auras walked out, surrounding the two people walking in the center. Carter's eyes instantly locked onto the woman. She was wearing a sharply tailored, off-white Chanel suit. Her shoulder-length hair was styled in soft waves, and her face bore refined, elegant makeup. As she walked, she conversed fluently in rapid-fire, highly advanced algorithmic terminology with the senior American scientist, Dr. Henderson, beside her. She looked confident, her steps unhurried, radiating an overwhelmingly powerful aura that was impossible to ignore. Carter's breathing instantly stopped. He knew that face too well. He knew it so well it had appeared in his dreams countless times. Except the woman in his dreams was always wearing a plain lab coat, no makeup, with a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. The woman in front of him looked completely reborn, so blindingly radiant he didn't dare look directly at her. The welcome sign in his hands hit the floor with a smack. His mind went blank. "Chloe," he unconsciously muttered. He was just about to eagerly step forward and yell the words he had rehearsed a million times. "Chloe, you're finally back," when he saw a tall, handsome, wealthy-looking young man step up naturally from behind her and wrap an arm around her waist. That man was Julian Pierce. Wearing a low-key but luxurious bespoke Italian suit, he had a relaxed smile on his face, holding Chloe close in a fiercely protective stance. Carter's feet felt nailed to the floor. He couldn't move an inch. His gaze was drawn like a magnet, locking dead onto the ring finger of Chloe's left hand. There, a uniquely designed blue crystal ring reflected brilliant, ice-cold light under the bright airport terminal lamps. That light felt like a sharp scalpel instantly slicing open his chest, exposing all his fantasies and delusions to the air, leaving nowhere to hide. Engaged? How could she be engaged? Wasn't she supposed to be struggling out there, waiting for him to come save her? How could she forget their 8-year relationship so quickly? Countless chaotic and absurd thoughts rammed wildly around Carter's brain, freezing him entirely. The city officials hadn't noticed his breakdown. They had already rushed forward with wide smiles. "Dr. Henderson, Dr. Davis, welcome, welcome. Thank you for the hard journey." I stopped walking, shook hands with the city officials politely, and spoke in an official, detached tone. "You're too kind. This is just our job." From beginning to end, my gaze didn't linger on Carter for even a single second. He was standing right there, less than 10 feet away, but to me, he was indistinguishable from a completely irrelevant piece of background scenery. Julian noticed the burning, jealous stare. He subtly tightened his arm around my waist, leaned his head down, and whispered in my ear using a voice only the two of us could hear. "Looks like we came back at exactly the right time." The expression on someone's face is truly spectacular. The corners of my mouth curled up almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Carter Hayes, this is only the beginning. All the contempt and arrogance you once forced onto me, starting today, I'll make you taste it back tenfold." The next morning, the city convened the first technical seminar specifically for the project restructuring. The boardroom was filled with city administrators, project members, and our MIT consulting group. As the project lead, Carter naturally had to be the first to take the stage and report on the blood, sweat, and tears of their progress over the past 3 years, along with the revised proposal. He clearly hadn't slept a wink. There were heavy, dark bags under his eyes, and his face was somewhat pale. He forced himself to stay alert, booted up his PowerPoint, and began using his usual flowery, empty bureaucratic buzzwords to paint a grand blueprint for the executives in the room. I sat quietly in the lead evaluator's seat, holding a pen, his project report spread open in front of me. I didn't interrupt him. Whenever he reached a critical data node, I simply used my red pen to casually circle it on the report. Half an hour into the presentation, Carter's mouth was dry, and fine beads of sweat had formed on his forehead. After he finished, he habitually looked toward the city officials, waiting for a round of approving applause. However, the boardroom was engulfed in an eerie silence. Everyone's eyes were focused on me. I put down my pen, raised my head, and looked calmly at Carter standing on the stage. "Supervisor Hayes, thank you for your presentation." My voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed clearly into every corner of the room. "Your PowerPoint is beautifully designed, and your pitch is very compelling. But I have to ask, the 98.5% turbidity purification rate you mentioned on page 17, which experimental model is this data based on?" Carter froze, clearly not expecting me to ask something so specific. He stammered, It's based on the dynamic equilibrium model, newly developed by our project team." "Is that so?" I smiled slightly and pressed the projection button on my laptop. Instantly, a massive set of complex, precise data flow comparisons appeared on the giant screen behind me. The set on the left is an early-stage theoretical model I built 3 years ago. At the time, due to a lack of core algorithmic support, its theoretical purification ceiling was only 85%. And the set on the right is the data flow from your report. "Supervisor Hayes, can you explain why your brand new model has over a 90% core algorithmic overlap with my discarded model from 3 years ago? Furthermore, how exactly did you achieve that magical extra 13.5% efficiency using a framework I already proved had fatal flaws?" As soon as my words fell, the room erupted in sharp gasps. The faces of the city officials instantly turned iron gray. The other project members all lowered their heads, not daring to look at Carter. Carter stood on the stage, the blood draining completely from his face until he was bone white. He opened his mouth but couldn't force a single word out. He never imagined that I not only remembered every piece of data in his report, but that I could clearly see every trace of him plagiarizing my past work. I didn't give him a moment to breathe. I continued, switching to rapid-fire, highly advanced algorithmic jargon to explain to Dr. Henderson the dozens of other instances of data fabrication and logical loopholes in the report. I spoke quickly, firing off specialized tech terms one after another. Carter stood there like a prisoner facing a public execution, listening to the high-level data science language he had once desperately wanted to master, which now sounded like an alien tongue to him. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead in large beads. Finally, I switched back to plain English to deliver the closing summary. Ladies and gentlemen, based on this report, my conclusion is that the current project proposal is not only entirely unfeasible, but it also contains severe data fabrication and academic fraud. If we continue pushing this proposal forward, it will not only cause a massive waste of federal funds, but will likely trigger a catastrophic ecological disaster. Our firm recommends terminating the existing proposal immediately, dissolving the current team, and starting from scratch. My words were a heavy sledgehammer, smashing violently into Carter's heart. He stood there, sweat soaking through his expensive shirt, his face as pale as paper. He looked down at me calm, composed, and blindingly radiant, and finally realized with agonizing clarity that the lucky star he threw away 3 years ago wasn't some disposable accessory. She was the only brain he ever relied on to survive. And now, that brain had returned to settle the score. The seminar ended in disaster. Carter was publicly chewed out by the city officials on the spot, slapped with a formal reprimand, and immediately suspended from his role as project manager. He packed up his things like a defeated rooster, not daring to make eye contact with anyone the entire time. As the boardroom slowly emptied out, I was discussing the next steps with Dr. Henderson. Carter suddenly appeared in front of me like a ghost. His eyes were bloodshot. He stared dead at me, his voice hoarse from suppressed rage. Chloe Davis, did you really have to be this ruthless? I closed my laptop, looked up, and met his gaze calmly. I'm simply stating facts and fulfilling my duty as a technical consultant. If you think this is ruthless, then what you should be reflecting on is your proposal, not my attitude. Drop the act. He took an agitated step forward, but was smoothly blocked by Julian, who positioned himself a foot away. You dare say you didn't do this on purpose? You come back wearing another man's ring, tear me to shreds in a meeting, just to humiliate me, just to get revenge for me breaking up with you? Looking at his face, twisted by jealousy and bitterness, I suddenly found it somewhat hilarious. Even now, he still thought the world revolved around him. Supervisor Hayes. I stood up, looking down at him with a trace of pity in my voice. Aren't you overestimating yourself? Revenge? Do you think the person you are right now is even worth the effort it takes for me to seek revenge? My words were a needle precisely popping his fragile ego. His face instantly turned purple. What? What do you mean? I mean, in my eyes, you and your flawed report are exactly the same. A work problem on my checklist that needs to be solved. Once it's solved, I turn the page. As for your little love-hate dramas, I lost interest a long time ago. I stepped around him to leave, but he completely lost his mind. Ignoring Julian's presence, he lunged forward and grabbed my arm. I don't believe you. He stared at the ring on my hand with bloodshot eyes, his tone reeking of jealousy and self-delusion. We had 8 years together. What does that pretty boy know about you? How long has he even known you? Chloe, tell me, you're just doing this to make me mad, aren't you? You still have feelings for me, right? His grip was incredibly tight, making my wrist throb. I frowned, just about to rip my arm away. Carter Hayes, my voice turned ice cold. You personally severed our 8 years together. What right do you have to bring up those 8 years to me now? When you were marrying Lauren Sterling, why didn't you think about our 8 years? When you treated me like a free ghostwriter and stole the fruits of my labor, why didn't you think about our 8 years? With every sentence I spoke, his face grew paler. I only realize now how arrogant and overbearing Lauren is. I can't live with her. I was wrong, Chloe. I really know I was wrong. He suddenly softened his posture, a crying hitch in his voice. Come back to me, okay? I'm a supervisor now too. Even if I'm suspended, as long as this project gets fixed, I'll get my position back. I can give you dignity now. I can give you a better life. Listening to this chaotic, logically broken confession, I only felt a wave of nausea. Dignity? I laughed coldly and forcefully yanked my hand back. Supervisor Hayes, your dignity is built on fraud and theft. It reeks of a nauseating, rotting stench. Don't touch me. I feel dirty. That sentence was the final straw that broke the camel's back. All of Carter's disguises and forced bravado collapsed in an instant. He looked at the undisguised disgust in my eyes, looking as if all the strength had been drained from his body, stumbling backward 2 steps. His lips trembled. He wanted to say something else, but Julian had already stepped forward, completely shielding me behind his back. Mr. Hayes. Julian's voice wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable, crushing authority. I think Chloe has made herself very clear. If you subject my fiancé to any further harassment, I can't guarantee that a cease and desist from my legal team won't be on your desk by tomorrow morning. Carter glared at Julian like he was looking at an enemy. His gaze was a mix of jealous hatred and deep powerlessness. He knew that whether it was status, ability, or presence, he was entirely outmatched by this young man. He took one last look at me, a gaze as tangled as a knot of yarn, before turning away in humiliation, practically fleeing the room. Watching his panicked retreat, I felt no thrill of revenge. I only felt the exhaustion of the dust finally settling. "Are you okay?" Julian held my slightly cold hand, asking softly. I shook my head, leaning against his solid shoulder, and whispered, "I'm fine." I just didn't expect that after 3 years, he'd still be so pathetic. Yeah, pathetic. He'll always live in his own world, thinking all mistakes can be forgiven and all lost things can be recovered. He doesn't understand that some people, once missed, are gone for a lifetime. Carter's harassment didn't stop because of my coldness. Over the next few days, he acted like a madman, trying every method to contact me: calls, texts, emails, even passing messages through our old mutual friends. The content was always the same: confessions, nostalgia, and begging. I ignored them all and blocked every number. Being ignored clearly agitated his fragile ego even more. That night, Julian and I had just finished a dinner with the city officials and returned to our hotel. Just as we reached the door of our suite, we saw Carter waiting at the end of the hall like a vengeful ghost. He had clearly been drinking. He reeked of alcohol, his hair was a mess, and that expensive suit was wrinkled. The old confidence was completely gone. As soon as he saw us, he charged forward but was intercepted by the hotel security guards. "Why are you doing this to me?" He screamed at me through the guards, his eyes red. "I know you still hate me. Are you happy seeing me look this pathetic?" I didn't even want to waste a breath on him. I pulled out my keycard to open the door. "Don't think you're so great just because you found some rich, pretty boy." His words turned vicious. What does he know about research? He just sees you're young and pretty and useful to him. When he gets bored of you, he'll dump you just the same. Only me. Only our 8 years are real. He was screaming hysterically, drawing stares from other hotel guests. Julian's face darkened. He signaled the security guards to let Carter go, then took long strides to stand right in front of him. "Mr. Hayes." Julian was half a head taller than Carter, creating an absolute mismatch in physical presence. "You were asking what kind of pretty boy I am, right?" Carter was intimidated by his aura and instinctively took a step back. Julian didn't throw a punch, and he didn't curse. He simply pulled out his phone, opened a document, and held it right in front of Carter's face. It was a portfolio valuation report for the environmental tech fund under the Pierce Venture Capital Group. The long string of zeros was dizzying. "My name is Julian Pierce. I'm Chloe's fiancé, and the lead venture capital investor for this project restructuring." Julian's voice was calm and crystal clear. Every word was an ice pick stabbing violently into Carter's heart. "That local environmental firm your father-in-law is so proud of? The one you just mentioned?" I ran a background check. "The core product they went public with last year is suspected of infringing on a technology patent my fund registered 3 years ago." Carter's pupils violently contracted. "According to federal law, that infringement is enough to force them to pay at least a 9-figure penalty and permanently bar them from the national market." Julian smiled slightly, but the smile carried a bone-chilling coldness. "I wasn't planning on moving against them this quickly. Lawsuits are tedious. But since you're so eager to know who I am, I don't mind having my legal team deliver a surprise to them tomorrow morning." Carter was entirely dumbfounded. His lips turned white, and his whole body was shaking. He never imagined that the pretty boy he insulted actually held the life and death of his father-in-law's company in his hands. Julian pulled his phone back, adjusted his cuff, and gave one last look at the man whose face was the color of ash. His tone was filled with utter contempt. "You spent 8 years draining her talent and blood like a leech, and then you threw her away like garbage. Now, she has stood back up on her own, shining brilliantly, and you want to wag your tail and beg for forgiveness? Mr. Hayes, you've fundamentally misunderstood something." Julian's gaze turned as sharp as a knife. "I don't play games with feelings. I only believe in value. And Chloe Davis, she, herself, is the most precious treasure in this world. You threw a treasure away like a rock. Now, I'm going to take back everything that belongs to her, with interest." With that, he didn't spare Carter another glance. He turned, walked to my side, gently wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and pushed open the suite door. The door closed slowly behind us, permanently shutting out Carter's face, which was written with shock, fear, and despair. I leaned against Julian's chest, listening to his steady, powerful heartbeat, feeling an unprecedented sense of peace. So this is what it feels like to be firmly chosen and unconditionally loved. The difference between light and shadows was stark. Julian's warning was a blockbuster bomb that sent massive shockwaves through the Sterling family. Early the next morning, Lauren Sterling came to the hotel. She was no longer the arrogant, spoiled brat. She wore pristine makeup, but it couldn't hide the panic and exhaustion in her eyes. "Dr. Davis." She forced a smile, lowering her posture completely. "I think there might be a misunderstanding between us. Regarding the patent, our company had absolutely no idea. It might have been a mistake by a third-party subcontractor. Do you think we could sit down and talk about this?" Looking at her groveling behavior, I only felt irony. "Miss Sterling," I took a sip of my coffee and said flatly, "whether there is a misunderstanding isn't up to you or me. It's up to the lawyers and the evidence. Furthermore, I'm very busy today. I don't have time to talk with you." "You." Lauren's face instantly turned ugly, but remembering her father's severe warnings, she violently swallowed her temper. "Chloe Davis, what exactly do you want? Do you really have to push this until we ruin each other?" "Ruin each other?" I felt like I had just heard a joke. "Miss Sterling, you might be misunderstanding the current situation. From beginning to end, the only ones qualified to be ruined, here are you." Lauren was choked speechless, her pretty face flushing red. She probably never imagined a day would come where she would have to swallow her pride in front of the ex-girlfriend she had previously dismissed as a nobody. Seeing that playing nice wasn't working, she flew into a rage out of humiliation. "Chloe Davis, don't push your luck. Do you really think spending a few years out of state means you can come back here and act like a tyrant? Let me tell you, this is my turf. My dad is the Commissioner of Urban Development. I can make your project hit a dead end with a single sentence." She finally tore off her mask, revealing her true colors. I looked at her, shook my head, and thought with pity that she and Carter Hayes really were a match made in heaven. Two idiots. They were forever drowning in their pathetic, limited delusions of power, completely blind to how the real world operated. Is that so? I put down my coffee cup, stood up, and looked her straight in the eyes. Then let's wait and see. That afternoon, the city held its second public hearing for the project. This meeting included not only city administrators but also local media and citizen representatives. It was entirely public and transparent. When it was our firm's turn to speak, I didn't just talk about technology like last time. I walked onto the stage and opened a brand new PowerPoint. The first slide featured a massive, bolded title: Statement of Evidence Regarding Suspected Academic Fraud and Embezzlement in the Initial Phases of the Urban Ecological Water Project. The moment the words appeared, the room erupted. Carter and Lauren's father instantly turned as pale as ghosts. I ignored the commotion in the crowd. I calmly went through every single piece of evidence I had gathered over the last 2 years. I showed how Carter used his position to steal my unpublished data models and package them as his own innovations for federal grant applications. I showed how he conspired with specific project members to fabricate environmental impact data to defraud government subsidies. And I showed exactly how the Sterling family's enterprise used illegal, anti-competitive bidding tactics to secure the equipment contracts for the project. Every single accusation was backed up by clear email screenshots, data comparisons, and anonymous whistleblower recordings. The chain of evidence was flawless. The logic was airtight. It left absolutely no room for denial. I looked down at the man who had once stood so high above me, now dripping in cold sweat, and remembered the text he sent me 3 years ago. "Leave some dignity for you and me." Now, I was tearing the dignity he cared so much about into tiny pieces in front of the entire city. The hearing room exploded. Media camera flashes fired like strobe lights. The city administrators looked furious. The meeting was emergency halted. That very night, federal investigators formed a special task force and entered the municipal agency. Carter was suspended on the spot and taken away for questioning. Lauren's father was also pulled in for interrogation. The skies over the city changed overnight. The poker table woven by power and lies was flipped completely upside down by me, the outsider, who refused to play by their rules. Like rats fleeing a sinking ship, the colleagues and subordinates who used to surround Carter and flatter him now avoided him like the plague. And the Sterling family, the crutch he relied on to jump social classes, cut ties with him at warp speed. On the third day of the investigation, Lauren filed for divorce in court. The grounds for divorce were stated perfectly. The husband's severe fraudulent behavior has led to the complete breakdown of marital affection. Not only did she demand a divorce, but her lawyers pushed all the responsibility for the failed project and the massive impending financial restitution squarely onto Carter's shoulders alone. The two people who had smiled so brightly in their engagement photos were now tearing each other apart in court for their own survival, creating a spectacle as dramatic as a soap opera. I didn't pay attention to the details of the circus. I only occasionally saw fragmented updates on the social media feeds of mutual acquaintances. Someone said they saw Lauren speed away from the courthouse in her Porsche, leaving Carter squatting alone by the curb, wailing like a stray dog. Others said the Sterling enterprise paid a massive settlement for the patent infringement and commercial bribery, severely crippling the company. Lauren's father barely managed to keep his job but permanently lost any chance of future political promotion. As for Carter, his life completely plummeted into the abyss. He was fired from his government job and permanently debarred from receiving federal research funding. He would never be able to work in this industry again. All his real estate and savings were seized by the Sterlings as compensation in the divorce. He was also saddled with a portion of the debt from the federal funds that had to be repaid. Overnight, he went from the ambitious, highly promising Supervisor Hayes back to having absolutely nothing worse off, even than when he was just a kid from a small town. He used to look down on my sunk costs the most. And now, he had become the city's truest, most ignored sunk cost. The day before I was scheduled to finish my final tasks and leave the city, I received a call from an unknown number. On the other end was Carter's mother, her voice choked with tears. "Chloe, I know I shouldn't bother you, but Carter, he's dying." My heart dropped. "Ma'am, slow down. What happened to him?" He locked himself in his room for 3 days and 3 nights without eating or drinking. He wouldn't open the door for anyone. I just looked through the crack under the door. He slit his wrists. When I arrived at the hospital, Carter had just been wheeled out of the ER and moved to a regular ward. Because they found him in time, his life wasn't in danger. But due to massive blood loss, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. His parents sat by the bed. The two elderly folks, who had been relatively healthy, looked as if all their life force had been drained in just a few days, aging 10 years. Seeing me, Carter's mother started crying again. She grabbed my hand, repeating apologies over and over. "Chloe, our family is so sorry for what we did to you." I didn't say anything. I just quietly poured them a cup of hot water. The figure on the bed seemed to hear the noise and slowly opened his eyes. When his gaze focused on my face, those eyes that used to be full of ambition and arrogance were instantly flooded with complex emotions. Shock, shame, regret, and a faint, almost invisible sliver of hope. "You came." His voice was hoarse and dry, like it had been rubbed with sandpaper. I nodded, pulled up a chair, and sat down by his bed. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my tone as flat as a still pond. He laughed self-deprecatingly, tugging at the cuts on his mouth, wincing in pain. "You saw it all, didn't you? I have nothing left. My job, my family, my reputation. I'm a joke. A complete and utter failure. What's the point of staying alive? So you used death to run away?" I looked at him. Carter Hayes. The Carter I knew. Even if he was poor, even if he was insecure, he had a stubbornness in his bones. He was the guy who would eat cold bread in a freezing apartment and study until dawn just to get into grad school. He would run to every construction site in the city just to gather data for a project. When did he become such a coward? My words seemed to sting him. He agitatedly tried to sit up, but fell heavily back down due to weakness. "What do you know?" He gasped heavily, his eyes red. "You're the high and mighty Dr. Davis now. You have a future. You have a fiancé. Of course it's easy for you to stand there and judge. Do you know what it's like for me to walk down the street and have everyone pointing at my back? My life is ruined." "You ruined your own life," I cut him off coldly. "You were the one who chose to take shortcuts. You were the one who chose betrayal and fraud. Carter, you chose this road yourself. Now, even if you have to crawl on your knees, you're going to walk it to the end." I stood up. I didn't want to waste any more words on him. I didn't come here to pity him, and I certainly didn't come to save him. I just came to see how the man who had occupied 8 years of my youth had personally smashed his own life to pieces. Chloe, just as I turned to leave, he suddenly called out. His voice was no longer a scream, but a desperate plea. Can we really never go back? I stopped walking. I didn't turn around. From the moment you sent that text and chose your dignity, we were already doomed to burn. With that, I walked out of the hospital room, leaving his suppressed, agonizing sobs far behind me. Walking out of the hospital, the sunlight was a bit blinding. I took a deep breath of the air tinged with the smell of bleach. My heart felt an unprecedented lightness. I could finally completely sever ties with my silent 8-year past. The day I left the city happened to be the night of the city's International Outstanding Women in STEM Gala, honoring our consulting group. The gala was broadcast live online, aimed at promoting the city's image of valuing scientific research and respecting talent. As the core figure of this recognition, I was naturally the center of attention. The venue was star-studded and packed with elites. I wore a starry night blue gown hand-picked by Julian, standing under the spotlight, composed and confident. And Julian, acting as a special guest presenter, handed me the crystal trophy for outstanding achievement. He took the trophy from the host, but he didn't hand it to me immediately. Holding the microphone, he looked at me gently. The love and pride in his eyes were practically overflowing. Before I present this award, I want to share a story with everyone. His voice echoed clearly through the speakers across the ballroom and out to thousands of households watching the live stream. 8 years ago, there was an incredibly talented girl. She could have possessed the brightest sky of stars, but for love, she chose to hide her brilliance. She turned herself into a silent satellite, orbiting another person, burning away 8 entire years of her youth. That person took her sacrifices for granted. He treated her talent as a disposable stepping stone to be squandered. After draining her very last drop of value, he mercilessly pushed her away into the dark universe. Julian paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd before landing back on me. But he was wrong. He didn't know that a true star, even if temporarily obscured by clouds, will eventually rise again in an even more blinding fashion. Today, she stands here. She is no longer anyone's satellite. She is the center of the universe. He turned to me, a moving light flashing in his eyes. So today, using this stage, in front of a global audience, I have one more, much more important thing to announce. He set the trophy down, pulled the familiar velvet box from his pocket, and got down on one knee in front of me again. The room instantly erupted. The camera flashes and screams nearly blew the roof off the building. 8 years ago, someone treated Dr. Davis as a disposable stepping stone. But today, I am announcing that the Pierce Venture Capital Group is officially establishing a $100 million International Young Scientist Foundation in the name of Chloe Davis, dedicated to supporting young people who possess dreams and talent just like her. The greatest honor of my life isn't being called a VC genius, nor is it the wealth I possess. He looked up at me, articulating every word with absolute solemnity. It's that I am about to become the legal husband of Miss Chloe Davis. In that moment, I could no longer hold back my tears. I looked at him kneeling before me, looked at the crowd cheering for us, looked at the Marry Him comments, scrolling rapidly across the live stream screens, and my heart was filled with a massive, overwhelming sense of happiness. Meanwhile, in a rundown apartment on the other side of the city, Carter Hayes was staring at a beat-up television, watching this exact scene. He looked at me on the screen, surrounded by the lights and blessings of the entire world. He watched as another man used the highest profile, grandest method possible to declare his devotion and love for me. A mouthful of metallic blood rushed violently up his throat. He remembered many years ago, when I had excitedly asked him if we could announce our relationship on Instagram. How did he answer back then? He had said, "Chloe, stop messing around. My career is on the rise right now. Being too public would have a bad impact on my image." A bad impact. So my 8 years of youth were just a bad impact to him. Yet another man treated me like an absolute treasure, eager to show me off to the entire world. Massive regret and agony gripped his heart like an invisible hand. He clutched his chest, coughing violently, until his vision went black, and he completely lost consciousness. A week later, Julian and I had finished all our domestic affairs and were preparing to fly back to Boston to plan our wedding. In the VIP lounge at O'Hare, the sunlight was perfect. I leaned on Julian's shoulder, watching the planes take off and land through the window, my heart completely at peace. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but answered it anyway. From the other end came Carter's weak, raspy voice. Chloe, I just want to ask you one last thing. What if I hadn't broken up with you? What if I had proposed to you back then? What would we be like right now? He asked, his tone pitiful and full of unrealistic fantasies. I stayed silent for a moment, then answered calmly. Carter, there are no what-ifs in this world. Even if we had gotten married, with your true nature, you still would have ruthlessly abandoned me at some crossroad the moment a bigger payout came along. Our ending was destined from the very beginning. With that, I hung up the phone and blocked the number. The plane pierced through the clouds, turning the city that held my 8 years of love and hate into a tiny speck of light. I opened my iPad. On it was the invitation to the Global Environmental Awards and the approval documents for my new independent lab at MIT. The sunlight shone warmly through the window onto my face, illuminating the sparkling rings on Julian's and my ring fingers. The girl who used to cry tears of joy over a cheap bowl of instant ramen in a freezing Chicago apartment was completely dead in the past. The person alive now was Chloe Davis, a Chloe Davis who belonged entirely to herself. A woman's youth is never a sunk cost. It is the roaring furnace fire used to forge her crown. And those who once tried to break your wings will ultimately only be left in the filthy mud, staring up in despair as you spread your wings and soar toward the sun, never to return.